We are back for round 4 of this Eternal Tournament Series weekly. I am Sir Rhino, and joining me in the booth is a very, very special guest, a man of many opinions, IlyaK. How are you doing, Ilya?
Good. In fact, great. Great to be here. Great to be casting the ETS along with another world-class player. It's great to cast along with you, Rhino.
Oh, I appreciate the enthusiasm. I know you were in the tournament earlier today. Wasn't quite working out for you. Those Stone Scar Gunslingers still need a few things to be worked out. But now you're in the booth with us, and we've got a doozy of a matchup here. We've got level 13 David on a kind of an Ikaria list with Primal in it. Maybe not the traditional Ikaria blue that we've seen in the past, but a lot of the hits are here with Rise to Challenge, Harsh Rule, Ikaria, those sorts of things, up against Racerman on Temporal Control. So let's start on David's list. What sticks out to you as far as a unique choices? Because it looks like a mid-range deck. It's got Sheltering Rider and Whirling Duo, but there's still the Harsh Rule in here.
It does. It's actually a very interesting list. And what struck me is the Whirling Duos and especially the Shelterwing Riders, which are definitely unorthodox in a typical quote-unquote Ikaria blue list. And this deck looks like it's trying to have a plan that it can essentially adjust on the fly. That if my opponents control, hey, I can beat them down with Aegis units and charge units. If my opponent is aggro or mid-range, then I can play lots of removal and neutralize his board. And then you have the 4 copies of Ikaria at the top end, which is fairly unorthodox for an Ikaria blue, which would run 1 or 2 copies, which it would usually fetch for Rise for to the challenge after it stabilized the board. So a list that looks conventional at first glance, but when you take a closer look at it, it's actually putting on a different spin on things, and clearly it's doing well today.
Yeah, early versions of Ikaria lists were really close to the Armory, right? You even had artisans in some of those lists and Sword of Ikaria and things like that. And the idea was these weapons are really good Ikaria Warcry hits in addition to Ikaria. Now instead you've got Whirling Duo and Sheltering Rider as your Warcry hits, which are also pretty good hits. Like large units with Aegis or large units with Charge and Lifesteal. That's a pretty good game plan. So it's, as you said, it's working out for level 13 David. He is 3-0. But so is his opponent, Racerman, who is on Temporal Control. This is a deck that sprung up right when Set 3 came out. A lot of players were excited to brew with Temporal Distortion. Then it kind of took a backseat as some other combo decks and things were just going way over the top of Harsh Rule decks. And now it's making a bit of a comeback here post all of these balance changes. Racerman currently playing to a 3-0 start with this list.
Right. So Temporal Control, when you give a combo deck all the time in the world, then it's going to be an endless amount of "there's no escape," or an endless amount of Vara reanimations. And DWD essentially said these decks are banned. Now Temporal Control is sort of the ceiling on the format, that you give your opponent time, that a temporal player is looking to get to 8 power, and then drop this card that says, oh, I can play all these haymakers not only on my turn, but then I get all my power back and I can play them again on your turn.
Yeah, and the thing here is there's eight drops in this deck. It's not cheap. You've got to buy the time to get there and hope that you can do that. Right. And against this Ikaria list, you might be able to, but Ikaria can bring the pressure quick. As this game is underway now, players are just going through the early turns, doing what control versus control does, which is draw cards and develop power.
Yeah, essentially draw, power, go.
Yeah, and that's what we see here. I think both players now are getting, okay, strategize in response to strategize wisdom. David already has an Aegis on his face. So if he draws a weapon, which is kind of hard for Racerman to deal with, he has 3 disjunctions, but now this Aegis on the face, that's going to be hard for Justice Primal time deck to deal with or pop naturally. There's no Black Sky Harbingers or Vera's favors to pop this thing. You're going to have to use basically a Channel of the Tempest on it.
Right, right. As someone that's played his fair share of Chalice back in the day, pick it up again. When you see an Aegis on your opponent's face, you roll your eyes and groan because TJP does not have great options for popping that facial
And
Aegis.
yeah, David rising for an Ikaria doesn't have the influence for it yet, but by picking up this Crest of Fury off of a strategized means, he will have the third fire and the third justice to curve out into Ikaria plus Ikaria in 2 turns.
That sounds very scary.
Yeah.
Especially considering that temporal control doesn't actually have a lot of ways to interact with Ikaria on the Ikaria player's turn until that temporal comes down, and Racerman does not have his namesake card in his hand.
Yeah, Racerman's got the tools to deal with 2 Ikarias, though. Does have a Desert Marshal plus a Vanquish for the first one, then a Sword of the Sky King, assuming he gets to 8 power in time for the second one. So it won't be the end of the world, but those Ikarias are going to get in for some damage and generate some value with those Warcry hits, and then presumably David will rise for whatever those Warcry hits were. And continue pressuring from there. But in the meantime, it's just a lot of reactive cards on both sides. Racerman opting to Wisdom there rather than Celestial Omen, as again, he's trying to hit power. He wants to be able to cast these Sword of the Sky King and Channel the Tempest as soon as possible.
Right, so there's the first Ikaria coming through. David elects to be conservative and play out the 5/5 first. But here comes the Desert Marshal Vanquish combo, and this is the one issue with Ikaria decks when you're playing her in a control shell, that you really don't have a lot of great ways to draw out interaction.
Yeah. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, okay, so we're seeing the second Ikaria come down, which is definitely going to prompt the Sword of the Sky King.
If Racerman draws undepleted power here, but he does not, but gets a nice consolation prize in Vanquish, which will let him deal with the Ikaria instead.
Okay, so Desert Marshal Vanquish on both Ikarias. So now David is essentially down to his rise to the challenge for this last threat. It's going to be huge, but we have to see just what that threat is. If it's a Throne Warden, then this might just give Racer enough time to find an answer and render all those war cries on moot.
So we don't get to see the rise, but again, it could hit Throne Warden, it could hit Sheltering Rider, it could hit an Ikaria, or it could hit Whirling Duo. If it's Whirling Duo, that's a 13/13, and that's actually potentially lethal in combination with Torch. But we see it's an Ikaria, it's a 17/15. That's a big girl.
Boy.
And Racerman can't get a Sword of the Sky King down this turn to get him outside of lethal range from that Ikaria.
No, Racerman is on 7 power. This is going to be over in a hurry.
Yeah, we talked about how Ikaria decks sometimes lack ways to bait out removal for the first Ikaria. Well, it had enough to bait out enough removal for the third Ikaria to stick, as we see Celestial Omen come out from Racerman. That gets swiftly countered by Island's Choice.
Right, and this is basically heaven for an Ikaria deck, just how you drew it up. Or Ikaria hits Ikaria, and then just crack them over the head.
Yep, no other win cons required. David, again, was running Sheltering Riders, which may have been part of that solution to the problem you were talking about, as far as getting other cards out of your opponent's hands to deal with threats before Ikaria shows up. It is a 5/5 flyer with Aegis, much like Ikaria, so it can eat the similar things. But not needed that game. Just Ikaria into Ikaria into Ikaria. That's how you beat control decks. And that's what we were seeing in even the past metagame with something like Charge Rod that was on the rise against all these harsh rule decks. Was just you can only take so many big hits from big units before you crumble.
Right. And essentially Ikaria is basically the only reason above Torch. Like, she's the second best card in Fire, in my opinion. That is the reason why you want to go to high power counts in Fire, because whatever else Fire has Ikaria just wins games, and trying to play other control decks such as JPS control or TJP control. The thing that I always found missing in these Huru type Wisdom of the Elders harsh rule decks is this very sticky win con that will end the game quickly. And there are very few ways of ending a game more quickly than an Ikaria that got war cries off of 2 other Ikarias.
Right. She's just a very nice control win con in that once you have stabilized, she can end the game quickly and minimize the number of draw steps your opponent gets from that point. So now we're going to go into sideboarding. And what do you expect the Racerman now being down a game? What do you think he can adjust as far as in this matchup to bring in? Because I'm looking at his sideboard. I mean, there's some unseals. Those counter, rise to the challenge and strategize. You can fight over like wisdom.
They counter the rain of frogs that I expect level 13 David to be bringing in. That's for sure. I think level 13 David gets more from going to the sideboard as he can side out things like vanquishes, lightning strikes, harsh rules, and while in the meantime, Racerman still does have to respect the fact that his opponent wants to win the game with units. So he's going to have his sideboard tugged from multiple angles. What if those Ikarias hit a weapon? I need Divisions of Austerity. What if those Ikarias hit another Ikaria? I need more interaction for units. I think David may be advantaged here, but I still think it's going to be very close because it's who draws the correct interaction for his opponent's limited number of win cons.
Right. David definitely gains more advantage after board because Racerman already kind of had the next level to start with, right? 0 units, as you said. So he can't really change that. He can bring in some Combrei healers and Great Parliaments, and I wouldn't be shocked to see Great Parliament come in here. As far as at least getting something onto the board, but David can take out a lot of these dead removal spells and turn them into more threats, whether it's extra Throne Wardens or even Auric Runehammers is just a threat that attacks on a new angle. That's really hard for a temporal deck to deal with.
Right. Yeah. If I were David, I mean, I think the cuts are fairly straightforward. That you cut the lightning strikes for sure. You absolutely cut the permafrost and the harsh rules. That gives you 10 cards to board in. Which would be 2 Islands choices, 2 Throne Wardens, 3 Rain of Frogs, 2 Runehammers, and then maybe 1 Rock Slide for the Desert Marshals. It's basically David is looking at what cards can I possibly bring in because he certainly has a lot of cuts to make, and that's a great position to be in.
Yeah. So he's essentially going to, as we said in game 1, David's plan is kind of two almost clashing philosophies where it is control, but it was playing some strong mid-range threats in Whirling Duo and Sheltering Rider, and now he's just going to emphasize that side of the game plan and get away from the control and just be a really big mid-range deck that's throwing hard to deal with threats at this temporal deck.
So looking at David's hand, sure if this is pre or post mulligan, but it looks like it has exactly what David wants to do, which is draw cards, develop power and influence, and present threats, all of which are in his opening hand already. Though if this Shelter Wing Rider gets sneezed on, then the one puzzling aspect of David's deck that I found was that it runs no protect to reactivate a Shelter Wing Rider that was interacted with.
Yeah, we up to this point in the game, Shelter Wing Rider decks have always found some way to refresh it, whether it's naturally playing protect or if you're in an unseen deck having the unseen that refreshes its Aegis, or Architect. Yeah, Spark Celestial Architect is an option as well, or even then you've seen Huru decks that play Hammer of Might and No Strix, right? There's always something to refresh the Shelter Wing Rider. And yeah, David is uniquely not playing any of those options. Now, Protect did just get nerfed. I don't think it's to the realm of unplayability, but a lot of players are opting to go with 0 in their 90 in a lot of decks we've seen so far today.
Right. I think it's still very much a playable option. Now it's just going to be a Justice's deck, quote unquote, poor man's version of something like an Unseal or a Backlash, rather than, oh, hey, this is the best card in the game against interaction, unless you're playing Channel the Tempest or Harsh Rule.
So Racerman's got a lot of options here, but it's hard for him to cast 2 spells this turn unless he'd want to, for some reason, use Vanquish, then Desert Marshal on a Sheltering Rider. But it's not like you really need to silence the rider's body, as we just talked about. There's no threat of it getting an Aegis again.
Correct. So I'm expecting to see this Desert Marshal come in, but it does not.
Yeah, he opts to take 5 damage here, figures that's a tolerable amount, and then will instead use Wisdom of the Elders.
All right, that's a reasonable line, assuming that your opponent has no other threats in hand. But now we see this Throne Warden developed, and David is saying, okay, if you're not going to deal with one threat, here's another. And the Auric Runehammer we see in his hand is probably coming out next turn with a Strategize, is going to say, and in case you can't deal with 2, here's 3.
Yeah, Racerman opting to use 2 of his power on a Strategize this turn, despite having the ability to use both the Desert Marshal and Vanquish in some combination this turn. Doesn't want to do that. Probably opting to pop the Aegis on a Sheltering Rider this turn with one of his cards, and then next turn trying to clean up the rest of the board in some fashion. Puts a Channel the Tempest on the bottom. Already has 2 8-drops in hand. Doesn't want to have too many more. Would rather keep on things like the Great Parliament and even the Moondial going into the long game.
Oh, so we see that that Racerman did indeed bring in the parliaments and said, if we're going to take this battle to the sky, then I have something to answer. The question is, will he be able to live to that point? Level 13 David opting to Strategize and Crest so that he can develop that Icaria the next turn.
Right. This is David applying pressure quickly now, playing these big Aegis units that are putting on a real clock and demanding multiple cards to be answered. And this is what we were talking about. In the first game, Racerman was able to answer the first Icaria because it was the first unit he saw. This Icaria is going to be a bit tougher to deal with if Racerman opts to throw multiple cards at this Throne Warden. But instead, we see the Moondial come down. So Throne Warden's not going to be dealt with here. Instead, it will get to attack again. Not even a Vanquish coming out, as Harsh Rule is the draw. So Racerman will be able to Vanquish plus Harsh Rule next turn and kill, presumably, the Throne Warden, but instead planning for this Icaria that could also come out as David hits his 7th power.
Right. This Icaria, rise up or be cut down, coming down, and a huge swing.
Oh, man. And now, yeah, Racerman will Vanquish and Harsh Rule the Icaria, but he's at 10 health. David, if he draws Undepleted Power, has both Auric Runehammer and Alpine Tracker to play this turn. And that could spell the end. Instead, it's a Rock Slide, and that's good enough.
Oh, yeah. Rock Slide is the draw for the turn. And, right.
Yep.
Racerman is tapped out. And that's going to be 4 + 4 + 2.
That's 10. And that'll be it. David taking this at a convincing 2-0. Just really tough to deal with threats for a spell-based removal deck to handle. Just too much Aegis, too much charge, and too many 2-for-1s that were getting in so much damage that game.
Right. That when you're looking for win cons as control, you can't play dies to removal units. So we're playing units that demand multiple cards and can't be answered on their initial attack. And that's what happened. And as you see, it was pretty brutal.
Yeah, that was just a really rough matchup for the Temporal Control deck. We saw basically both games them dying before they could even think about playing down something like Temporal Distortion or Sword of the Sky King or even a Channel the Tempest. Just way too much pressure from this control deck out of David, right?
Right. And when you're casting an 8-drop, you need to, in the form of Channel the Tempest, you need to actually kill something. You can't just say, I spend my turn removing an Aegis.
Yeah, it was tough, right? Racerman didn't want to use Vanquish to simply pop an Aegis. He had a couple Desert Marshals to help with that, but it was simply not enough to get the job done and remove these threats efficiently, especially with some of those turns where he decided to instead use wisdom and strategize to keep hitting his power drops as well. It was just too much for him to answer in the time that he was given from David.
Right, right. So if I may make a suggestion, if you're out there and you're playing these TJP or JPS control decks, you might actually want to consider Eye of Winter, just because you pay 2 power and pop, there goes an Aegis. Or maybe play Levitate, cycle, draw a card, and there goes an Aegis. When you have to spend vital premium removal like a Vanquish, or dare I say a Channel the Tempest to remove an Aegis, you are going to be very unhappy.
Yeah, it hasn't been a great environment for Eye of Winter. There's a lot of charge units and endurance units out there right now, but it's still a very useful tool. Forces your opponent to overextend, so makes your harsh rule better as well. Levitate, when you're playing 0 units, is a pretty high-risk card, but it's still a very good tool to keep in mind. As you said, it's a cantrip that can pop Aegis, and when you're light on options, you got to take what you can get.
Right.
So with that, it looks like there's only a few matches outstanding in this round, so we won't be jumping into any backups. Instead, we'll be taking a real quick break, catch ourselves a breather, and get ready for more eternal action in this next round. Stick around.
See you in round 5, folks.